Kia ora and welcome to tonight's live stream meeting the candidate electorates, Te Atatū electorate Candidates 2.0. My name is Samuel Eva and I'll be your host for tonight, and we'll be questioning the candidates on their views on issues facing Te Atatū and wider community. It's important to remember that while we call it Te Atatū, we are including the suburbs of Henderson, Ranui and Swanson. They are all part of the Te Atatū candidate from the last election. Tonight we have 4 candidates with us. We have Phil Twyford from Labour, Alfred Ngaro from National, Brendon Monk from Top, and Simon Court from ACT. Unfortunately, Okasatino from the New Conservative Party could not make it tonight due to a double booking. New Zealand First were invited but did not have a candidate stating. The Greens were invited, however, after a discussion about their commitment to Te Atatū, it was decided that they would not take part in this discussion. We are seeking for a champion of Te Atatū, someone that wants to stand up for the electorate of Te Atatū and represent us around the table, making sure that Te Atatū gets what we need and what we want. So, let's meet our new candidates. First, we have Labour candidate, third term incumbent Phil Twyford. Kia ora, Phil.
Kia ora.
Thank you for being here. It was a bit of a rush down in Wellington traffic there, but you got here, so that's awesome.
Good to be here.
So, just to outline where you are, you're a 3-term incumbent, sitting in the seat of Te Atatū. You're number 4 on the list, so quite comfortably up the top there. You're the Minister of Transport, Minister of Economic Development, and the Minister of Urban Development. Can I just ask, what qualifies you for these roles?
I think probably like all of the candidates here tonight, I'm qualified by a desire and conviction to serve our country and our community by a sense of public service. I've spent a lifetime working for social justice with non-government organisations. I was the founding director of Oxfam in New Zealand and ran the global policy and campaigning operation out of Washington DC. I'm a former journalist and a former union organiser, and that's my background, and I'm Labour through and through.
Labour through and through, awesome. Cool. Our next candidate tonight is Mr. Alfred Ngaro. Kia ora, Alfred.
Kia ora.
So Alfred, a little bit about yourself. You're number 30 on the list, so a little bit of work there to do to get into Parliament. You've served 2 terms as the Minister for Pacific People and the Minister of Community and Volunteer Sector. You're currently the spokesman for the Pacific Peoples, Community and Volunteer Sector and Children and Disabilities issue, is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
And same question that I asked Phil, what do you think qualifies you for these roles?
First of all, te wiki o te reo Māori, so kia ora koutou katoa. Not te easy me tautu kuruti te pōnei. So what qualifies me? Well, first of all, Pacific is about migration. It's I'm a first generation New Zealand born of parents who migrated from the Pacific, and New Zealand's story is a pioneering story. West Auckland's story is the home of the pioneers. And so for me, it's a story in which we came here to work hard, to set a future, and so we know what it is to have that in our DNA. That's part of our character. When I look at the other characteristics of children, for instance, children are part of whānau and family, and so what is important is about being a person who not only has his own family, but also champions the needs of the most vulnerable at times, but also to the opportunities that all children should have in our country to succeed and to thrive and to do well. The other areas around the community and voluntary sector, they're the backbone of our society, of our civic society. And for over 20 years, my wife and I, we've been part of the NGO sector, delivering services into our community with our people and developing a community-led development approach. I've been over to Canada and other places with the Tyndall Foundation. And so community-led development, not doing it to community but with community, has been a big part of my experience as well. And the last one is our disability. And disability, I would say, is the most vulnerable of all of our communities. And so for me, being able to see the opportunities, enabling good lives has been something that we've championed for quite a long time. It puts the control and choice into the hands of our disability community. And so for me, it's being a voice for them and with them, but more importantly, actually providing a place for them to speak as well. So I have all of those elements that make me, I suppose, qualified to take on those roles.
Awesome. Thank you, Alfred. It's quite a CV. That's awesome. Awesome community involvement there. Moving on to our next candidate. Two of our minor parties in New Zealand. The first one I'd like to introduce is Brendon Monk from the Top Party, or the Opportunities Party. Brendon, you still no list number from Top. I thought that list was meant to be in by now, but that's okay.
It was released today.
Oh, was it? Okay,
Yeah,
not on your website.
5:30.
Oh, 5:30. Okay. So what is your list number there?
10.
Number 10. Nice. Okay. It's so you'd be looking, if you got 5%, you'd be in government or parliament. Sorry.
Not quite, but it might depend on whether we get an electorate seat as well.
Yep.
There's a couple of good
Maybe
chances
Te
there.
Atatū.
So
Maybe not.
yeah, that's what I'm certainly hoping for. We've got two other very good chances as well, down in Twyford, down Wellington Way,
Yep.
and also down Dunedin Way. So
Fantastic.
let's see.
And so you're the spokesman for urban development and housing.
Yeah.
Why do you think you're qualified for those roles?
I'd probably say two things. One is on the knowledge side. I'm a registered architect, also studied urban development, and I also, the second thing would be, I have a good sense of social well-being and social justice. Put those two things together, and I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out what is really causing the total mess that is housing in New Zealand. It's more specifically housing affordability. Now, if there's one thing that should be the biggest election subject, that is housing affordability, because almost all of the social problems we've got in New Zealand, can be traced back to poverty and inequality, and all of that, all of the roads lead essentially to housing costs, which have been going up faster than incomes for over 30 years. Now, this is heading us towards a massive social disaster. I'm just about the opposite of what a politician is. I can't believe I'm even sitting here being part of a political party. But years of watching this happen has driven me to the desperation of joining a political party that I think actually has the answers, and using my knowledge to actually push that agenda to actually solve the problem. I just cannot sit back and watch successive governments, coalition governments, for so long sitting on their hands and not solving this horrendous problem.
Housing issue.
That is why I'm here.
Awesome. Hey, thank you so much for that, Brendon. Very passionate response there. Very easy to read, and just on time. So thank you for that. All right, just that alarm, if you do hear that, we have given our candidates 2 minutes to speak per discussion point, and we'll be keeping to that 2 minutes. So if they hear that alarm, I'll be cutting them straight off from there. Understand? Great. Our last candidate is Simon Court, who is standing for the ACT Party. It's great to have you here, Simon.
Thank you, Samuel.
Awesome. So Simon, you are number 5 on the list, on the ACT list. And under current polling, you actually have a great chance of being in Parliament. Is that exciting?
It's exciting, and it's the challenge that I put my hand up for.
Yeah, awesome. So you're the spokesman for the environment, for infrastructure, and for energy resources. Is that correct?
That's right.
I haven't missed anything.
They haven't given me any more yet, but I'm sure they will.
Great, great. So same question. Why do you think you qualify for those portfolios?
So I'm actually a civil and environmental engineer, and I've worked in that area for about 25 years. So I've done about 10, 12 years on landfills, in construction and operations, and cleaning up hazardous waste on some of New Zealand's worst contaminated sites. I've also delivered infrastructure projects, including the ultra-fast broadband, transportation projects for Auckland Transport and Auckland Council and NZTA in Auckland and in Wellington. And for a short time I worked up in Fiji, delivering major projects for the Fiji government as a consultant, and those projects were delivered by Chinese government contractors in quite remote, difficult, challenging situations, and with a workforce that needed a lot of help and support and mentoring. So that was a really interesting job. And also I've worked in really dangerous places like Auckland Council, where I was an engineer and a manager there for 3 years, and I had the role of managing their closed landfill portfolio, which is the 200 odd rubbish tips, many of which are in the coastal area, including some around the Henderson and Te Atatū area in Taipari Strand, for example, and Corbin Reserve. So that's a bit about my technical background. I'm a father of 3 teenage boys now, including my youngest son Louis, who has Down syndrome. So I have a different perspective from a lot of engineers and politicians about what it means to be a vulnerable person and needing some additional support to achieve your potential in life. Yeah.
Good.
Thank you.
Awesome. Hey, thank you, Simon. So thank you to you all for being here. It's really great getting your background and hearing about what drives you and you know what you're looking to I guess drive in your parliamentary careers. So we're going to start tonight with 10 questions about the Te Atatū electorate. Now, just a quick question, hands up if you may. Who lives in the Te Atatū electorate? 3. Just Brendon. Okay. That's okay. Hopefully you know a little bit about the electorate that you're competing in.
I've kayaked every inch of it. If that's
Well, we're going to be talking about the quality of water tonight, so I'm not sure that you want to be kayaking in some of this water, but anyway, cool. So some of these questions, some of these answers, can't see that, can you, Alfred?
No. I don't have my glasses on, so I'll be right.
Some of these answers we actually spoke about in our first debate. Okay, so you might be able to, or our first discussion, I should say. So you should be able to recall some of the answers. First question, and your names are your buzzer. Okay. How many cars use Te Atatū Road on-ramp every day?
Alfred, 38,000.
I think you can see it.
You must be able to.
No, I only know because when we were putting up a sign and then we had to look at a traffic management plan, and then it was the traffic engineer that told me.
Very
and then when we did the widening of the road, when Auckland Transport did it, Higgins, the contractor, and AT were there, and that's how I know.
Well, that was bang on the money. According to the NZTA website, 38,000 cars use the Te Atatū on-ramp every day, and the same again on the Lincoln on-ramp, giving 2 of the busiest West Auckland on-ramps.
makes sense, because I would have just doubled the number of houses and used that number. That's not far off.
Yeah, there you go.
Because cars go both ways, you see, there and back.
Awesome. Right, how many people are enrolled to vote on the general roll? Or this should be the 2017 roll. I wasn't able to get to
Phil.
Phil's roll. Phil?
44,000.
Close. Very close.
Alfred,
Yeah,
45,000.
very close.
Brendon, 47,000.
All right, so we had from the 2017 electoral roll there was 45,549 registered to vote. 57,200 people are eligible. 3,847 of them are on the Maori roll. 7,804 are not enrolled. If you're watching, please enroll, please vote. And half of those, of that 7,804, half of those are aged between 18 and 24.
Wow.
That's pretty poor youth engagement there. Okay.
So I think I got that, didn't
At 45,000, yeah. All right, Alfred. All right. Third question: does the Te Atatū electorate sit in the Tamaki Makaurau seat or the Te Tai Tokoro
Phil.
seat? Phil?
Both.
Both. Woo-hoo. That's good. So most of Te Atatū sits in Te Tai Tokoro, with Te Atatū South only sitting in Tamaki Makaurau.
Even if Penny Henare just put up his signs in the Te Atatū Peninsula.
That's fine, we will travel to work, right? Shopping there. Cool. Number 4. According to Wairemata Health website, how many beds does Waitakere Hospital have?
400.
No.
I would say 300.
Close.
I would say 280.
Oh,
So close.
It's a bidding war now.
285.
I'm going to give this one to Simon. All right, which was 283 seats.
Beds.
Oh, sorry, beds. Sorry, beds. Yeah, we don't want to be sitting in
It's
it.
a pretty long waiting list.
It is a long waiting list, and we all agreed that we're going to try and get a better hospital for West Auckland at our last discussion. Didn't we, gentlemen?
so the figure I gave of 400 is what actually they're proposing to get to 400.
Proposing.
Yeah,
Well,
there's 283. But
let's see it happen.
Yeah.
Let's see it happen. Cool. All right, I am driving along Te Atatū Road, which is this big road down here, for those that don't know. I'm driving towards Glendine, and I'm at the roundabout, and I pull into the shopping centre on the left. Am I still in the electorate?
No. Sorry. No.
Alfred? No, you are not. However, if you cross the road,
Yeah.
you are.
Mm.
Okay, so that was Alfred's. All right, school question. How many schools do we have in the electorate?
Simon. 7.
7.
Alfred?
I think there's more than 7 on Te Atatū Peninsula.
Yeah. There's actually 25, but if you count the kura kaupapa, it takes you up to 28.
Wow.
Okay, I had 27. I'll have to check the second one for the kōpapa.
There's the kura.
But I will accept that. Yep. 27. Any arguments on that? No? Great. All right. I'm leaving the Glendine shops and I'm driving down towards West City. I get to the intersection with the lights and I can see West City on my 45. I'm at the corner of Edsel Street. There's a big tile sign celebrating Henderson and the year it was founded. What year is on that sign?
1947.
1947? No.
Mm.
Oh, it's a toughie, Sam.
I'm going to have to give this to Phil because he's the closest answer.
Alfred, 1851.
1851.
So is the borough of Henderson, would that be
Which-
in the 1950s?
Yeah, 1953.
No, when Henderson was actually founded.
Look at that sign.
It'll be.
I see that sign almost
Yeah,
every
yeah,
day.
yeah.
Is that the same sign above the one that says house prices are out of control?
1919.
No, 1844.
Wow.
Oh, so it was the closest,
It's on that
1857.
sign. Okay, you were close, but I'm not giving it to any of you because that was
Was
a
that?
guess.
Well, no, it wasn't because I was human hoarding at that sign. I knew it was 1800.
Oh, that's
on
right, you
Saturday.
were over
I was
by,
human hoarding there. I was standing by the
Man
sign.
Alive.
Yeah. Well, no, Man Alive's on the other side.
Yeah. Were you not standing there?
No, it's all in Edmonton, Te Atatū. The old Henderson police station, which is now Te Whanau or Te Waipareira, and where you're talking about, it's this tiled sign right there.
Right. Okay, couple more questions.
I think I deserve.
Just
You should give him that one.
I knew it was
Oh,
close to
all right,
Give it to
all
him.
right.
1857.
All right. Ranui and Swanson were added to the Te Atatū electorate in 2014. This was due to a new electorate called Upper Harbour. Which was called Upper Harbour. What was the name of the electorate that Ranui and Swanson
Alfred.
were in before this?
Alfred, Waitakere.
Who was it?
Oh, I'm going to go with Phil. I think
Phil?
it was Phil. Just
Waitakere.
Waitakere. Yep, it definitely was. It's my old electorate.
we've got to get buzzers for the next one.
Yeah, extra point for who was the sitting MP before?
Paula Bennett. Phil.
Paula Bennett, yeah, that's cool. How much did the Western Ring Road cost?
Simon, about $1.4 billion.
Anyone else?
No, that's about right, I think. Including the tunnel.
Including
The tunnel was 1.4 on its own.
Yep, so we had, for the total project, 2.4 billion. The tunnels came over, surprise, surprise, at 1.89 billion.
Because National can never bring an infrastructure project in on budget.
Well, it delivered it, that's for sure.
Okay,
There's a
Jim.
lot of talk.
Wasn't the tunnel Helen Clark's idea?
Yeah,
All
but
right,
an idea's an idea.
Come on, Sam. Take control. Sam.
there we go. Last question.
You can grab each other's knees and
Right,
just...
what was the Henderson Pools built for?
What, Alfred Commonwealth Games.
Yep, what year?
It was 1980. I'd like to say 82. But
Simon, 1990.
Yep, 1990 Commonwealth Games. I'm giving it.
Bonus point.
well, hang on.
Okay,
You said
but-
what the pool was. You didn't say the year. You added the year
I
at
think
the
Alfred
end.
answered that.
I actually answered it, and then you just added it. So
Alfred, isn't that a supplementary question? I'm
I
trying
think
to get
that's half a point.
That's okay, because Alfred, you're still the winner with 5 correct questions there. I always find it's really interesting to see who knows the electorates, because I think there has been that, we've lost that focus. And I'm not talking of Te Atatū, you guys are great, right? But it's amazing how many local candidates that we talk, even councillors, and they don't know little things like that. I mean, that's not common knowledge, but I would assume that would be reasonably common knowledge for someone that's working in education or health or infrastructure. So thank you for indulging us on that. Right. Crowd, what we're going to do, we've got 6 discussion points tonight. We're going to, each candidate's going to have 2 minutes to discuss that discussion point, and then we're going to have a short break, and then we're going to come back to your questions. Behind the screen, I've got my friend Josiah, who's going to be reading those questions, and we're going to be feeding those through to me. And then after our short break, we'll be getting into those questions. While you're on the page, if you can, start a watch party or share the page. We'd love to see how many people of Te Atatū electorate that we can see. Right. First question, or first discussion point. We're talking about small businesses. It's been in the media a lot. COVID's happened. They're struggling. All right, and Te Atatū is full of them. We don't really have any big manufacturers in West Auckland. We've got a handful, but not too many. We're really full of small businesses, and they're really feeling the pinch. So what are we going to do to support these business owners? We've had some support from the current government, the wage subsidy. I was lucky enough that I qualified for the first round, and that really helped me get me through. But this COVID is going to start, it's affecting us longer and longer and longer. Okay? Now we're talking about borders being closed until the end of next year. What are we going to do to support it? What's our next step supporting our small business owners? Alfred, seeing as that you won that quiz, I'm going to let you go first. 2 minutes.
Great, thank you, Samuel. So people would have heard the announcement that we had about a new tax policy, And simply, that's putting more dollars in the hands and the back pockets of ordinary Kiwis and New Zealanders, and even for those in Te Atatū in West Auckland. In fact, on TV3 News this evening, they actually interviewed Western Panel and Paint down in Henderson. And they asked the owner there, would this announcement make a difference? And he said yes. Because what it means is that people have a little bit of extra money. When there's another job they want to do, whether it could be a scratch or a dent on a car, that'll give them a bit of work, you see. So that creates more employment, more opportunities. And that tax policy that we announced, we talked about the 3 different ranges, in which from 14,000 to 20,000. So it's lifting basically the threshold of where your tax will come off your income as well. And that's important to us. The other thing that we also announced quite earlier on is making sure that when it comes to capitalising any investment on infrastructure or in any machinery that's new, and again, that was on tonight, again, they talked about the fact the tax relief that they would have, the importance of small businesses would be important, because then they could actually retrieve that finance back up to $150,000. Why? Because for small businesses, and I've been a small business owner as well, cash is king. And we've got to make sure that's there. When it comes to employers, for its employees, our Job Start package meant that you would get an extra $5,000 to $10,000 to help them actually employ new workers or retain workers inside of that employment opportunity as well. We know at the moment, NZ stats have said there's going to be up to 185,000 people by mid next year who will have lost their jobs. These are ordinary Kiwis at the moment. We've got to make sure that our small to medium enterprise businesses can retain the ability to retain their staff as well. And so that's critically important. So those are just some of the announcements that we've made. We've got a track record that's proven. We've actually taken ourselves out of the global financial crisis. We know what it means to be able to open the portals to trade and investment. Investing in infrastructure, $31 billion is what we also announced as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Alfred, for that. We're going to come back to those tax cuts that you mentioned today.
Yep.
So I think every party has announced tax policy this week, and so we're going to actually discuss that next as well. So we'll come back to you on that, Alfred. Moving down the table, Phil. Obviously, as I mentioned, Labour has or the government has helped us so far this year, but now we're looking for further support. What's Labour's plans?
Thanks, Samuel. And first, let me really acknowledge and thank you and Joseph for putting on this candidate discussion and making it available to an audience right across the electorate online. This is one of the most important issues for West Auckland. West Auckland is really the home of small business in many ways. And the jobs that our community relies on in large part come from small businesses. I think that the Labour-led government over the last 3 years has demonstrated that we are serious about creating an economic environment where small business can thrive. And in this incredibly testing time of the global pandemic, our record is there for everybody to see. So we've invested in the last 7 months, we've invested $13 billion in the wage subsidy. And if we hadn't done that, there's no doubt that hundreds of thousands of small businesses around this country would have gone under. The wage subsidy scheme, I think, compares favourably to all of the similar schemes in Australia, the UK, the US. We put the money up so that it was available immediately. And of all of the wage subsidy schemes across the OECD, this one touched more businesses per capita, per head of population, right across the economy. So that's a big demonstration of our commitment. We've also made available a small business finance guarantee scheme that provided cash flow for businesses. And in West Auckland alone, nearly 7,000 businesses right here in our communities have borrowed more than $110 million interest-free for the first year. And that again is a huge benefit. We know that moving forward it's...
That's the alarm, Phil.
Okay, then I'll come back in the next answer.
Awesome, thank you, Phil. Brendon, what's TOP's plan for small businesses?
Well, firstly, several things, from the general down to the specific. small businesses in New Zealand have struggled for a long time because they've generally been starved of capital because all our money's tied up in housing. What we need to do right now is change that system, change the tax base so that more money gets channeled into business and not being sunk into unproductive housing. Secondly, what we need to do is for small business is do things like abolish provisional tax, incentivise and subsidise investment into more technology. We need to do things like take low emission vehicles out of the
Fleet.
the fringe benefit tax, things like that, things that actually make it a little bit easier for businesses to move ahead. What we also need to do, because as we all know, businesses survive on customers. So if we can actually, rather than the government picking a few winners to really subsidise, how about we give money to the people in the form of UBI? It's basically quantitative easing for the people, not business. Put more money in people's pockets through a UBI. The people then can go out, they can spend that money in this sort of environment. That's the thing that helps small business.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Brendon. Awesome. And Simon from ACT, what is ACT going to do for small businesses?
So the ACT Party knows that small businesses need flexibility and certainty, as well as customers with cash in their pockets. So in terms of flexibility, what ACT will do is reintroduce the 90-day flexible working arrangement for new employees, and in fact extend that out to 12 months, because at a time when we're predicted to get 185,000 people unemployed, a lot of employers will have a very large number of people to choose from, and we'd like to take some of the risk for employers out of that equation by extending the 90-day trial period for new employees out to 12 months. The other thing we're proposing to do is to give a permanent tax cut, because not only is it very damaging to the economy and to human lives and well-being to be yo-yoing in and out of lockdowns, it's also incredibly damaging to people's confidence and certainty to be yo-yoing in and out of tax cuts. So while we've heard from my colleague Alfred here that the National Party proposes a temporary tax cut, we just can't understand how a family which has budgeted and planned, say, for swimming lessons or to buy a new home would suddenly feel if their tax cut promised by the national government, by a National Party, is pulled out from under them only a few years down the road. So ACT would propose to lock in permanent tax cuts, a 17.5% rate for people earning up to $70,000. That would put around about $2,000 back into the pockets of the average wage earner. The other thing that we'd do for small business is to give them some certainty. So right now the borders are closed. We don't know when people can come back. So what we need to do is actually establish a far more technology-based approach to managing the border, just like Taiwan, which had 25 million people and only 7 deaths. They use a contact tracing system that far exceeds the capability of our contact tracing app. So ACT would introduce a proper contact tracing system. Thanks.
Thank you, Simon. It's really interesting that most of you brought up tax, which is our next discussion point. We've seen some big tax announcements this week. Obviously a new tax level of 39% for those earning over 180,000. I think that includes politicians, which is okay.
Not backbenchers, Sam. I've been told I'll never have a ministerial limo. ACT MPs will only be backbenchers. We're going to hold government's feet to the flame.
All right. Of course, we've already touched on a temporary shifting of the tax thresholds, effectively giving us a tax cut for 16 months, 14 months? 16 months? Yeah, I thought it was. Which we're going to touch on. And a new junk food. One of these guys wants to tax my ice cream. So, Phil, because Labour announced their tax policy first this week, a new higher tax bracket, 39% for those earning over 180%, expected to tax about the top 2%. Describe what we're trying to achieve here.
Yeah, it's Labour's view that everyone should pay their fair share, and our party believes in a progressive taxation system so that the more you earn, the more you pay. And by OECD standards, New Zealanders are lightly taxed. We don't pay much tax compared to many other advanced economies, and we think it's appropriate to add another marginal top rate of tax, 39 cents for people who earn over 180,000. That will generate a little more than $500 million a year in extra revenue, and that will make a significant contribution to paying down the debt that has been accumulated through the country's response to COVID-19, and we think that's important. It's a contrast between what we're proposing. We think everyone should pay their fair share, including the top 1%, and what the National Party has announced today, which is a tax cut that will disproportionately benefit the well-off in society at a time when I think everyone is concerned about growing inequality in New Zealand. And it calls into question, I think, the National Party's assurances that they are not going to make massive cuts to public services. We looked at the numbers today, and it simply won't be possible, based on the National Party's spending promises and their announced tax cuts, to avoid huge cuts to public services and existing government spending. And the choice that voters have in this election is one between a government that's committed to fairness and will spend in the interests of the whole country and economic growth, and the path of austerity, which means cuts to health and education and other public services, because that's what National is offering.
Okay, thank you for that response there, Phil. Alfred, so as you mentioned, and as Phil has just talked about, a temporary shifting of the tax thresholds, effectively giving us a tax cut for 16 months. Yet it seems that for those that need this tax cut the most, they're going to end up with $8.10 in their back pocket. Anyone earning under $20,000 a week, $20,000 a month, year, is going to end up with an extra $8.10. That's not even a lunch these days, is it?
So actually, if you think that through, those that are on that, actually that's why we've got, it was National Party that's helped to set up the Working for Families. So there are already subsidies, there are already
set up by Helen
allowances.
Clark's government.
Okay, well she again had the thought, sort of try to set this up to get it going. We actually improved it to make it run effectively and efficiently, right? So I know Phil's smiling there because he knows that. And the reality is, right, the fact is that that's where that fits in. So we're talking middle New Zealand here. But, Phil talks about the fact is that, look what this is, it's fiscally irresponsible. We only need to see that in 3 years, this country gave trust and confidence, actually not to the Labour Party, actually it was the National Party that actually won the majority of votes, but couldn't form a government. That's our reality. So under this coalition government, what have we had? We've had $2 billion spent on fees free, right, which was a failure. Not one single extra person went to university, right? So the fact is that when we think about the Kiwi Bill, the nearly billions of dollars that were spent that failed, like rail, we could go through a whole host of actually spending that was wasted. And we're talking about what we are doing, first of all, with the tax cuts, is putting money in the hands of Kiwis, right? Why? Because it's important. It actually works out to about $3,000 per year, about $50 for middle income New Zealanders. That's what we're talking about. So what this will do will improve their opportunities to about their purchasing power, the ability to about again help to go out there and keep small businesses operating and running, like in West Auckland, like the panel and paint, like the Henderson Glass, and all of those that are out there that know that actually is what helps to drive the economy as well. These are the things. Look, the truth is, the National Party has a track record from the global financial crisis in 2008, when we took ourselves out of debt. What this country is looking for is that when we look at the economic record and the track record of who can make the difference to getting the economy back on track, we've got the track record, we've got the experience and the expertise. You just need to look at the expertise that comes into this team called the National Party, where we've got merchant bankers, we've got those who've been CEO of large corporates and businesses, right? We've got accountants, we've got lawyers, we've got people who actually understand what it means to drive an economy, to provide for Kiwis and New Zealanders. That's what we produce, that's what we've got there. That's a track record compared to what we've had in 3 years.
And that's time.
I think that actually people will know that's the difference.
Yep. Okay, so I think you touched on some good stuff, and it's sad that we can't keep diving into these, but I don't think you still didn't talk about the $8.10 a week.
Well, I did. I said that
I mean,
working
yes,
for families.
Sure. You've got working for families,
There's
but
a tax credit.
it still works out to that $8.
Not if
Hey, it's a whole block of cheese.
Well, I don't even know if it's a block of cheese these days. I mean,
It's about $11, the cheapest one for a kilo.
It's a tax cut for the rich in a time of
It's-
economic crisis.
all right,
That's what
all
it is.
right.
Wow.
I don't think so.
Okay.
The average
I don't
wage
think
is
so.
rich, is it?
All right, gentlemen.
Wow.
Thank you. All right,
That's aspirational.
Let's move on to Simon. So Simon, I was looking at the ACT policy today. GST to 10%, which is great, because I think GST really hurts the working poor or those the poor. They're spending more of their income on GST, so a big GST tax cut, which is great. Income tax for the middle bracket, so that's earners below 70,000, being cut from 30% to 17.5%. I mean, that to me is a significant tax cut. Sorry to say, a little bit more than Nationals there. How is ACT going to afford that? And just give me a briefing about why you've come up with this policy.
Well, the reason we've come up with this policy is because money in the pockets of taxpayers goes a lot further than money in the pockets of governments. So anyone running a small business would know that your overheads typically run at about 18 to 20% of turnover. Whereas if you're running a government, it looks like for every dollar that they take, they typically waste about 30 to 40 cents in the dollar just on running government and overheads. We believe that $1 in a taxpayer's pocket is much better spent in the economy than $1 in government's pocket. But Samuel, you've asked how we will afford such a significant and permanent tax cut. And I'll tell you how we'll do it. We'll start by stripping out some of that wasteful spending that Alfred referred to. I'll give you an example. The first year free for tertiary students, that's an almost $500 million grant from working families to some of the wealthiest, most privileged people ever born on this planet. We're talking mostly university students who went to decile 6, 7, 8 schools, whose families and who could already afford to go to university and who were given $500 million. Now, if you're going to give $500 million to people to improve their lot, how about you give $500 million to those kids who were actually, particularly those poor brown kids who aren't getting qualifications before they leave high school? Look, the ACT Party doesn't understand the priorities of this government, and we struggle to understand how they could be giving money away like that. Then you look at Kiwi Build and the light rail down Dominion Road. I mean, there are so many wasteful projects which have consumed hundreds of millions of dollars in taxpayer funding just to get to feasibility stage before it turns out they're unfeasible, and guess what? We'll file that in file 13. But sorry, Mr. and Mrs. Taxpayer, we've taken your money and burned it in the meantime. ACT believes that there are many savings. Go to debtdestroyer.nz, have a look at our debt destroyer calculator. You'll see how we make the savings, Samuel.
Awesome. Thank you, Simon. I'll have to read up more about it. It's
act.org.nz, Samuel. You
right,
and all
right,
viewers
right,
can read
Simon.
about it.
All right. Moving along. Brendon, oh my goodness, a sugar tax. You want to tax my ice creams. Not only that, you actually want to raise tax to 33% flat tax.
That's not the full story.
All right, give us the full story in
Sounds
2
like
minutes.
a horror story,
Firstly, we've all had a go Alfred's national tax policy because it is a load of rubbish. But look,
Wow.
Labour's change is really just going to... The big problem we've got in New Zealand, under the current tax system, you know, some of our wealthiest people earning, who are worth more than 50 million, more than half of them are paying less tax than a teacher. There's a fundamental problem in our tax system. Now, raising the highest tax bracket for people earning over, say, 180k, you think that those sort of people aren't going to know how to get around that? What's going to happen? They're just going to channel more money where the biggest tax break is, and that's housing. That is ludicrous. So look, that is actually a regressive style of tax change. It's tinkering around the edges that ain't going to work. I'll come back to the sugar tax later, but look, TOP's tax reform policy is UBI, Universal Basic Income. What it is a modern, fair, simple tax system. What it ends up doing is, see, the big problem we've got in our welfare system is it's a giant poverty trap. People on welfare find it very hard on a benefit to get out of that and move into the employment sector. It's sort of a two-class
So you would
problem.
give money to people who don't work.
Let's let them finish.
And people who do.
And people who do.
Okay.
So a UBI ends up being $250 a week to everyone, $13,000 a year. With the flat tax you mentioned of 33%, combine them together and you have a more progressive tax system than what we have now. It's effectively giving the first 40 grand tax-free, and it's a continual progressive system. Look, what it does is gives everyone that basic security of $13,000 a year. If you are not working and you start to work, you keep the money. Look, it is a modern, fair tax system.
All right, UBI, 33% tax, flat tax, but you're giving the UBI $250.
Everyone's-
$250 a week.
Yeah, everyone is better
working,
off.
not working.
Yep.
They're getting that.
Sam, can I just comment on that? Because what we know is that government does cost about 30 cents on the dollar to run. So what Brendon's saying is we'll take, say, $1 million, but we're actually going to only end up with 700,000 to give back. So the UBI is a fatally flawed proposal.
That's right.
It's
Absolutely
never flown
not.
anywhere.
Sorry, but
All right,
it's,
that's off you.
sorry, it's
No.
a fully costed policy. It is tax neutral, and
No,
it takes a lot of the bureaucracy
No, it's
out of the current system.
Okay, cool. I know we're time pressed. Like I said, I'd love to dive into these issues a lot more, but we are time pressed. I don't have the budget of TVNZ. All right.
Oh, come on.
We need to come back for round
Okay.
3 so we can just spend an hour just on that one
Round
question.
3. All right. So moving on from that, water. I want to talk water. We're currently sitting in Te Atatū Peninsula.
We're surrounded by it.
Yep, surrounded by it. I have Te Atatū Beach down here. Down this side, I have Taipari Strand. Now, as a kid, I really loved learning how to sail and kayak in Taipari Strand with the Sea Scouts down there. But now we can't. All right. Under safeswim.org, it has the Te Atatū Peninsula as an unsafe place to be in the water with high fecal bacteria. How are we going to fix this? You know, we talk about farmers ruining the land and the water, right? But here we are in New Zealand, got the Watamata Harbour out here, and we can't swim it. And that's not coming from farmers, right? That's coming... Now, I understand that there is overflow from a council infrastructure. So how are we going to be supporting the council to get the proper infrastructure that we need, cleaning up not just our country's waterways, but our city's waterways, so that my kid can go for a swim down in Taipari Strand on a hot summer's day? Phil, we're going to start with you, bud.
Great. Thanks, Samuel. This is a really important issue for our electorate here in West Auckland. And there are 2 reasons we're in this mess and 2 things we can do to fix the problem. How did we get into this mess? It's basically in council's hands. They have failed over decades to properly invest our ratepayers' money into the infrastructure for stormwater and wastewater. And they've taken the cheap way out. They've allowed the city to grow without investing in the pipes under the ground to carry our water and treat it properly. The second thing is that council has failed to carry out its regulatory role. So they have not used their powers under the RMA to require people to deal with wastewater and pollution properly. So what can we do about it? Labor was elected 3 years ago on our pledge to clean up the country's waterways, not just dirty dairying in the countryside, but urban waterways like Henderson Creek as well. And David Parker's national policy statement on fresh water has the binding power of law. It legally requires councils to properly exercise their consenting and regulatory role in a way that means that from now on, no new development or industry or residential development can take place, can be consented if it makes the waterways, the fresh waterways, more polluted. And then over the next 25 years, we will first we stop the waterways getting worse, and then we progressively improve the quality of the water until within the space of a generation it is swimmable again. The second thing we've got to do is we've got to fix the funding and financing problem for local government to enable them to invest properly in the pipes. And they're trying to do that, but actually I have in the last 3 years passed legislation in the Parliament with the support of the National Party, I'm pleased to say, to allow private funding and financing of the infrastructure for urban growth, and this will take a lot of pressure off council balance sheets and allow them to invest in things like the central interceptor and more wastewater and stormwater pipes.
Okay, thank you, Phil. Just remember, guys, 2 minutes. Once that alarm comes off, you need to be wrapping it up, all right? Brendon, I can see you biting at a bit for it to reply to Phil there, so I'm going to come to you. What's TOP going to do? How are they going to clean our waterways? How are they going to support our councils to make sure that they're doing the right thing?
Well, the first thing is the legislation that Phil talked about, that sounded so great. Talk to the ecologists that actually sat on those working groups and you hear a very different story. They are really annoyed and pissed off at what happened in the end. Basically, behind closed doors, they essentially just bowed to the lobbyists. Look, what TOP are going to do, around the funding issue, councils are starved of infrastructure revenue right throughout New Zealand, not just in Auckland, which is affecting us right here in Te Atatū. The big problem is local government own about 40% of the infrastructure in New Zealand. They've got about 7% of the funding to manage it. It's all out of whack. TOP's proposal is to actually sort that out. We want to allow every region to claim back the GST amount on the development that is happening in that region, the value of the building consents. What that will do is drastically increase the amount of funding they've got. For example, in Auckland, what that will mean for Auckland Council is they'll have, based on last year's figures, around about 1.4 billion extra to spend on infrastructure every year. That's the sort of figure we need to actually fix our three waters problem. We do have basically shit running into the ocean around here, and sure, there may be some mismanagement happening in council, but there just hasn't been the money to fix it. What TOP want to do with legislation is to basically, through tax, incentivise good environmental management of water and penalise bad environmental management. Now, that's not just in the farming sector. Yeah, there is things that need to be improved there, but in the cities, our city water quality, what's actually running off our cities into the ocean, is much worse than what's actually happening in the farming sector. So we've got to sort that out.
Yeah. Great response, Brendon. Thank you. Simon, 3 boys at home. They like swimming in the water?
They love swimming, Samuel, and I'm also a keen sea kayaker. I've got a laser sailing dinghy, a pretty ropey one, in the backyard. So, like you, we love it, and one of the reasons why I moved to Te Atatū Peninsula a couple of years ago was for that wonderful amenity. Now, the main reason that our water quality in Te Atatū and in other places around major cities is because the Resource Management Act allows councils to grant themselves and territorial authorities, cities and districts, 25-year consents to dump raw sewage from overflows, including during dry weather, into the harbour. And we've heard from Phil today that he's got a plan to fix that in 25 years. Well, what I'd like to see is local authorities being actually fined now, being subject to exactly the same punishments and penalties that our persecuted farmers are. But fining and punishment is not enough, because this infrastructure deficit has been growing for decades and decades. That's true. And one of the reasons for that is because we've allowed politicians to tell us where they're going to cut ribbons, the projects they're going to deliver for political vanity purposes. And that has to stop. So ACT has a couple of policies to address that. We call that ending the infrastructure deficit. So we're going to put the infrastructure program, all of those tired and broken assets, into a priority list, and we're actually going to outsource the decision making of that to an infrastructure corporation, which will partner up with the private sector and use private sector expertise as well as private sector funding to double the amount of resources available to fix these problems in half the amount of time we've heard today. And we'll also allow councils to take half the GST from all of the building activity and all the houses they consent to increase the amount of money available to councils in New Zealand by billions of dollars a year. And I tell you what, there's nothing councils like more than taking your money. So we reckon they'll be right into it as well.
All right. Right on 2 minutes. Fantastic. And lastly, Alfred. You like the water? You go down to Taipari Strand?
Yeah, look, I'll give a local response. The fact is that I know Orongahina, which is over here, which is on the West Harbour. I've actually been part of Forest and Bird. I've actually cleaned, so we've done the cleaning on the foreshore. Been to the meetings where Te Waipara El Pareira over here talking about the very place and the waterways around Taipari and so forth. And it's right, the truth is that Water Care has actually dropped the ball, big time, and they should be held to account. And, Simon's basically agreed with our policy, which is that when it comes to the RMA, it needs to change. We've put too much in there, and so when we think about development and infrastructure, the RMA has put so much reliance and accountability around the impacts to the environment. So we would separate that, and we've already made an announcement. So Judith Collins talked about the fact we would separate that one part into a legislation around infrastructure and development, and the other would be around environment and conservation. So we'd still retain the importance of those two things, but we wouldn't get into a situation, just as Simon has explained, about the fact is that what the RMA is allowed to do is for councils and for other authorities to have those dumping rights. We remove them immediately as well. And the very thing that Phil talked about actually is what we started, which is UDAs, Urban Development Authorities. I know Brendon doesn't like this, but they're the reality of what we need to drive local economies and even in our city as well.
Sorry, I don't know where you get that from. We actually have urban development.
We've so that's really where we fit into this around that. But here's the thing: is that the truth is that when I look at I was initially thought about the big super city has actually failed us, and no one's talking about that. Why? Because over here, we've got the Waitakere chambers that are over here, right? At the moment, there's only a chambers, and in that facility, they've lost our local champions.
Alfred, you guys legislated it.
I'm telling you out right now.
You created the super
I'm going to say to you this. Yep, that's right. And you hear me, right? From a local perspective, we've lost the ability for people to be able to champion the things that are really important.
All right. Yeah, don't get me started on Super City.
Who here believes that we should have an Oceans Act?
I am going to give you a little bit of time to respond. So UDAs, there's a clear, you don't like UDAs. Is that true?
No.
He loves UDAs.
Absolutely.
Love them?
Look,
communication voice.
Look, what Top are proposing, if you want to look at the big picture of environmental sustainability, firstly, we're proposing a written constitution that actually mandates for all endemic ecosystems to be able to flourish. We would deal to the RMA, but in terms of making it more fit for purpose for all land-based ecosystems, rivers, things like that. We would also probably have an Oceans Act, and we have already a policy around Urban Development Act.
Awesome.
Which
Okay,
is
so you love
you did.
All right.
Opening up the conversation further.
Geez, look,
Yep.
I'm sorry to disappoint you guys, but I think Phil's already beaten
Take
both
control,
of you.
Samuel. Take control.
So I think Phil's already beaten both of you to the Urban Development Act. Didn't that pass and wasn't that signed into law in August of this
Yes,
year,
it
Phil?
was.
Well, our
Yeah.
policy was written a year and a half ago. Beat that.
Unfortunately, you're not in government, Brendon.
All right,
but-
gentlemen. Thank you. All right. We've got all night after the camera's turned off. All right. I'd love to hear it. Hey, two more points before we take a quick break, and this is around the referendums. Okay, so we're voting on or we've got referendums on two, I think, really important issues that could really change the fabric of New Zealand society. The first one I want to talk about is the End of Life Choice Act 2019. So this act was brought to Parliament by the ACT Party, and it has successfully passed all the hurdles a law needs to pass. An extra criteria was put in, I believe, after the second reading, that this really should go to a referendum, which was passed with almost full support. I want to get your personal views on this, and because we have an ACT representative here tonight, I'm going to start with Simon. I want to ask you a couple extra questions, Simon. How many doctors were involved in this bill? And one of the big pushbacks that I've read is the lack of controls that doctors are worried about and organisations like hospice. Can you sort of just tell us your point on this bill? Maybe, if you feel comfortable, how are you going to vote for it and why?
Thanks, Samuel. And look, a lot of the objections that we've heard raised over the last few months have been effectively dealt with through the select committee process. And what I'll tell you a bit about the background of that bill, the ACT MP David Seymour, supported by Deputy Leader Brooke Van Velden, has spent the last 3 years working on that bill, including engaging with people in the Netherlands, and in Canada and Australia to understand exactly what were the risks and opportunities about giving people this option. And we feel that through the select committee process, the consultation was very effective. And that's why ACT was able to get 67 MPs from across all different walks of life. You know, can you imagine MPs from across the House joining together to vote on this one? Well, that's what ACT achieved. So look, thinking about the objections of doctors and hospice. Hospice took the proposed End of Life Choice Act to court to get a declaration about some of those concerns that you've raised. And what the court said was that that's just this week, the High Court has said that those concerns are unfounded and that the bill adequately deals with them. So, thinking about what the bill offers, it offers people who would otherwise be faced with very difficult choices about either dying with huge doses of morphine to control their pain, or we've also heard a number of personal stories during the development of that bill about people being forced to take their own lives and their family members very distressed, finding loved ones who've taken their own lives rather than face the thought of a slow degeneration as part of a fatal illness. But you've asked me how I'll vote, Samuel. I'll be voting yes for the referendum because I personally believe, and ACT believes, in private property rights and that your body is your own to do what you wish. And so that's why I'll be voting yes in the referendum.
Thank you, Simon. Moving along the line then, Brendon from Top. What are your views on this referendum? If you're comfortable, how will you be voting? And do you have any concerns?
Well, firstly, I'll be voting yes. And
Excellent.
look, this is a real conscience vote, I think, for all MPs, all people standing for any political party. In my research and reading on the subject, which has been in the last 6 months, what I've found is looking at countries overseas and separate states within the US where they do have this kind of end-of-life choice bill or law, is that there doesn't seem to have been any real adverse problems with it. And also looking at the positions that certain people in New Zealand have taken, and what this is well-known New Zealanders, because these are the ones you hear from, who have actually had to face the end of their own life and the position that they've sort of taken on this bill. So that also gives me some comfort that, I don't know what it's like to actually face this, and therefore what I would think at that time, but looking at people who are facing this or who have faced this and the position they end up taking, that gives me some comfort that in actual fact this bill is worth voting yes for.
Awesome,
Yeah.
wonderful. Thank you, Brendon.
Phil, coming to you, so same lines as Brendon there. If you're comfortable with saying, how are you voting?
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I'm asking that is if you are going to represent Te Atatū, yes, you have your conscience vote, yes, you have a chance to, I guess, represent Te Atatū with that vote, which is why I'm asking that. So if you're comfortable, would you be voting yes or no? Are there any concerns about the current bill?
This is my personal view, and I want to stress that it's not an issue on which Labour has a policy.
That's right. Yep.
So most of the people who have supported this legislation, I think, have come to it from a point of view of the rights of the individual. I don't. I see this as an issue that has major implications for society as a whole, and I'm particularly concerned about the effect it will have on the most vulnerable in our society. Not everybody in our world expresses their independence, their autonomy, is fully in control of their destiny. There's a lot of people around us, our families, our neighbourhoods, our communities, who get by day to day and struggle. And my concern is that our most vulnerable people, and I think it's important to listen to the voices of the disability community on this issue, feel that this legislation risks making some of our most vulnerable people feel under pressure in the circumstances that this bill would allow to choose euthanasia, doctor-assisted killing or doctor-assisted suicide, because they feel that they are a burden on their families or their partners. And for me, that's a much greater negative consequence than the potential positives of this reform. I don't believe that the proponents of this bill have made the case that the current law is broken. We don't have the kind of system that they do in the States where it's a highly litigious society. Doctors do everything they can to keep people alive no matter what. That's not our system. We have a much better system that takes into account the views of the family and of the patient. I want to see us properly fund and resource palliative care in our health system. And I am concerned that this bill breaks the taboo that we have in our society against suicide.
1 second.
And I think that is not good for us as a country.
Okay.
Can I just respond directly to Phil? Will you give me a chance for rebuttal at the end? Because those are some very serious
they are
mistruths.
They are, but
spoken.
we have to respect that. That was a personal
Welcome
issue.
to politics.
That is a personal issue. Okay, and I will give Alfred his chance, but if you are watching this, I do recommend you head to referendums.gov.nz and which is a service provided by the Parliament, and will give both sides and resources of both sides of the argument. But I won't allow a rebuttal now, because I think this will go down a rabbit hole, but happy to discuss more after our event.
67 trusted MPs voted for it.
Thank you.
So I think that
Thank
says
you.
I think that
Thank you,
says
Simon.
it all.
Alfred,
Are there that many
your
Christians?
views, your personal views, if you're comfortable to tell us whether you're voting yes or no, do you have any concerns about this bill as such?
So
As-
I'm voting no against this bill, and here's the reasons why. Simon said the word serious. This is serious. This doesn't get any more serious because this is about life and death. And you can't just turn around and have a bit of research, go out there, because let's talk about the whole process over that 2-year period. 39,000 submissions, 90.6% opposed the bill. And inside of that, there was 1,700 doctors who signed a petition, an open letter, who turned around and said this is ethically wrong because in regards to their practice and their procedures, they know that there is a margin, huge margin for error. Diagnosis and prognosis are getting wrong all the time. So therefore there's a margin for error as well.
That's true.
Over 300 lawyers, QCs, signed an open letter who turned around and said that the ability to detect coercion is so complex and difficult, they cannot guarantee that that won't happen. And they added on to that, age concern, turned around, who look after our elderly and are most vulnerable, who said this. We have over 2,000 reported cases of elder abuse in this country. 67% of them actually are from family members. So we've got this question mark here. Will this be safe enough? Because that was the one issue. Not about moral, not about other things, but out of the 39,000 submissions, 90.6%, even after the select committee process, still opposed this bill openly. And by the way, what David Seymour had was 17 only doctors compared to the 1,700. They had no lawyers that actually would sign an open letter, would openly turn around and contest this. This is what we are talking about. And so both Phil and I have that concern. Why? Because we have a responsibility. And I believe the fact is that it's now in the hands of the public. My concern is this. Do they have enough information out there? Do they understand? And I'm not trying to turn around and actually say that they're not informed enough. But, people only know what they know.
Okay.
End of Life Choice Act, act.org.nz.
Well, that's
all
a
there.
cheap shot.
Thank
That's a
you.
cheap shot at the
Yeah.
end.
Well, that's
When
politics.
85% of the people don't
Alright.
know what euthanasia, they believe it's actually turning off life support.
Okay, thank you,
Okay,
gentlemen.
so it's a
Yeah.
cheap shot from Simon.
That's
Okay,
that's
an
because
end
it
of
is
life
life and
choice.
death.
gentlemen.
On your conscience,
Alfred.
if there's one wrong death, will it be on your conscience?
Alfred. All right, gentlemen.
I put that to you.
I thank you for partaking in that. And look, this.
Don't put out cheap shots if you're not
Alfred,
going to stand up.
Alfred, thank you. I understand this is highly emotive, and it's highly emotive for myself, right? I've had friends, I've had family members. I'm sure every viewer has been in this position, and we are now at the crossroads on whether we vote for yes or no.
Absolutely.
Right? Now, you guys did the dignity to say what you would do. For me, I believe in the practice, but I don't believe in the safeguards of the bill. And that's why I really wanted to get you guys to share your views on this. Okay? And I can see that it's emotive. So let's move on. Let's discuss this later. I'd love to discuss it further. Okay? Viewers, referendums.gov.nz.
You should see the live chat right now. It's fucking great.
It's
Is it going off? Is it?
it's emotive. It's
You'll have to watch it
really
later
emotive.
on. I'm sorry.
That voice in the background you hear is Josiah, our other organiser. Thank you for doing a great job replying to these comments here. All right, the second referendum that we've got going on is the Cannabis Legalisation and Control Bill. So unlike the End of Life Act, this bill hasn't actually been written, it has been written, but it has not been passed through the required readings. If the referendum is passed, then the next government can introduce the bill, but it is not binding, so can scupper it. Again, can I get your views, your personal views on this? Will you be voting yes? Will you be voting no? If you're comfortable to share. And what I understand you can't speak for your party, but what is your party's outline for this referendum? And a cheeky, have you tried it or not? Again, if you're comfortable, I'm not going to force it. Alfred?
So I'm saying no to the two referendums, one on death and one on drugs. Our National Party has a clear policy that it supports medicinal cannabis, and we think that's important to go through a rigorous process, like other pharmaceutical products as well. This is different. This is about recreational. This is about the fact of being able to grow it in your backyard like a tomato plant, have it as your use. So I think the fact is that those are the proponents of it are trying to mask to make us feel like that actually it's medicinal. It's not. It's different. And what we need to realise in other jurisdictions around the world, what we've also seen is that this is not just the old wacky Woodstock weed that used to be smoked, way back. This is the sort of product line we're talking about that comes in the forms of protein drinks. It comes in the forms of what you call lollies and other sort of types of products. And the THC levels, the stuff that makes you go high, right, is up to 80 to 90%. So what we are talking about is opening a portal and a doorway into our society and in our community, sending a message to our young people and others. By the way, the science proves that actually the smoking of marijuana for young people and the damage that it causes, right, neurologically is irreversible. So why would we want to do that? But I would go back to the fact of those who are in this community, those who support those who have to go through rehabilitation and support. Why would you send a message to say that this type of drug is okay? We're struggling with drunk driving. Now we're going to struggle with drug driving. We have those who are actually trying to support those who are coming out of methamphetamine, and we know that along with alcohol, it is also a gateway drug. And so for me, for those that I speak into this community, by the way, in Te Atatū, who would say to me, it's okay for the urbanites to think that's really cool, this doesn't work for our people.
All right. Thank you, Alfred. So that was a no. Have you tried it?
Yes.
Okay. Phil, your stance on the cannabis legalisation and control bill?
I'm voting yes on this one. I favour reform. I'm in favour of harm minimisation when it comes to drugs and taking a health-based approach. I believe that the war on drugs, the punitive approaches to the consumption of drugs has failed. New Zealand already has one of the highest rates of consumption of cannabis in the world. Unbelievably high rates of consumption. Our law is broken, it doesn't work, it's a nonsense, it costs a lot of money, and actually the production and distribution of cannabis in New Zealand is in large part controlled by organised crime currently. It does an enormous amount of harm. And yet cannabis is less damaging to the health and to the economy of this nation than alcohol is. And I think actually the way forward here, the sensible, progressive, enlightened approach is for us to regulate it, to control it, to tax it, and to set standards and do everything we can to protect people who suffer from addiction or abuse of this substance and any other controlled substance. And I think that's the way forward that will actually reduce the health and psychosocial harm that drug abuse can cause. And I also believe that the current system of kind of prohibition that's not actually enforced also has real social justice problems, because Māori suffer far worse rates of prosecution and imprisonment through our drug laws than the general population, and that's unfair.
Sure. Hey, thank you for that response, Phil. Comfortable to say that if you've tried it or not?
Yeah, of course I have. Yeah.
So, Brendon, now TOP, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think TOP was the only party when I was researching that actually had a cannabis legalisation policy in place. Right. So correct me if I'm wrong, the other parties, but that was what I could see on the website. Can you take us through that? What are your feelings about this referendum?
Yeah,
and yes or no?
Yeah, well, that policy was devised before the last election, and it's great to see that some others have picked up on some ideas around that. Look, Alfred mentioned it being a gateway drug. Well, like a gateway to what?
Well,
poverty, whatever. But look, if you're talking about gateways, the real gateway is in New Zealand to bad outcomes is poverty, inequality, housing, things like that. Look, cannabis, the big problem that we have is that people are going to smoke it no matter what. And in New Zealand, that means that they have to come into contact with the people who are running the industry, which is the gangs. We're talking about the mongrel mob and people like that. The current law we have forces them. That is currently a gateway to pushing people to actually have to have involvement with these sort of gangs. That's where the biggest harm comes from cannabis. It's not the smoking of it. So if we can actually take that whole problem out of it by legalising it, regulating it and taxing it, we remove a lot of problem. And then we can treat it as a health issue, as Phil said, not a legal issue. And we know from looking at other countries around the world and looking at the ones who are managing it the closest to what we are proposing, there are more benefits than there are negatives. Now, sure, it's all about harm minimisation. Yes, smoking cannabis, like a lot of things, is harmful to young people. So you don't make it legal for young people. We have an age limit, and we can actually control that much better when it is legal than when it is. Look, prohibition has not worked for anything around the world. So what are we doing? So
Right.
I'm a yes.
Thanks. That's a yes from Brendon.
And have you blazed up?
And
Yeah, and I'll tell you what,
Try that.
the worst thing that happened to me, smoking cannabis, was that a mate came round where I'd paid $20 for a couple of movie tickets online. He came round, he happened to have a joint, we smoked that. Got a bit relaxed, we had a chat, and then couldn't be bothered going to the movies, and I wasted $20.
And $20 is a lot of money these days. But we're going to get it through tax cuts, aren't we, guys? Oh, except for right, that's all right. Simon, your views on this bill, yes or no, and if you're comfortable with it, have you tried it or not?
So it's quite clear that prohibition hasn't worked. The war on drugs is a failure, and it's resulted in harm to many, many people through imprisonment and having to be involved with gangs and drugs and crime. So the ACT Party believes, and I believe, that bad law that's not working should be repealed and replaced with good law. Now this referendum, unfortunately, proposes a bill which does not really address all of the harms and does not set out a clear pathway. And I would suggest that's because it's been drafted and promoted by the Greens, who are probably not capable of crafting the law that would overcome the objections of people like Alfred and other people in communities which are suffering serious harm from drug abuse, particularly with young people, teenagers starting young. So look, ACT has a policy that we will honour the wishes of the people in the referendum, and we would see that bill as it currently is through the first reading of the House to Select Committee, but it needs some serious work to actually deliver a bill and a law that's going to protect young people from harm and improve health outcomes. And as to whether I've tried it, look, I'm one of those 80% of New Zealanders who has tried it, and I have enjoyed it, but it's something that cannot be tolerated in the workplace or on the road. So New Zealand has to get much better and much more agile and realistic about how we address the harms of drug use in the workplace and on the road. And so ACT would support a bill that addresses all of those harms and delivers a much better health outcome.
Perfect.
As with alcohol, right?
Indeed.
Yeah.
Also-
A good point about the bill actually being somewhat substandard because it was drafted essentially by the Greens. Look,
It's still got to go through the processes, right?
Yeah.
And,
but there's enough evidence out there
yeah.
to actually know what to do without having to go to a referendum, to be honest.
So I think what's important though is that if it passes the referendum, it sounds like, although it's personal views, it sounds like you'd get support from three parties. National was quite split, I think. Looking at a recent Herald poll?
No, we
Not
took.
sure.
I mean, we did take a principled approach. We were part of the cross-party working group.
Yeah.
Some of the points that have been made up, we disagreed with the way that it was drafted. And
Yeah.
the positioning of that.
But we've still got the readings and select committees to go, so we could clean it up.
Labor doesn't have a party position on it either.
Doesn't have a party
And
position.
There
My
are
apologies.
colleagues who don't support it as well. So.
Right, my apologies. It is one of those things, like I mentioned at the start of the question, it is something that could fundamentally change the fabric of society. Audience, we're going to take a 5-minute break. Just so that we can top up their drinks, go to the men's room, and we're just going to get a couple of questions from the audience tonight, which Josiah has sent some through. We will be back in 5 minutes, maybe less, so be ready, and thanks for joining us.
Great. So is the bar open?
Awesome. Hey, welcome back, team. Again, I'm sitting here with Alfred Ngaro, candidate for National, Phil Twyford, candidate of Labour, Brendon Monk, candidate for TOP, and Simon Cork, candidate for ACT. We've discussed some big topics tonight, and you guys have been filling up our chat here with many questions, and so we're going to jump to those right now. So the first question comes from Aaron. What have you done for Te Atatū electorate in the last 3 years, and what will you do for Te Atatū in the next 3 years? Let's start with the incumbent, Phil.
As Minister of Transport, I've recently secured $100 million of investment to increase the frequency, reliability and speed of buses on the North West Motorway. We all know that the State Highway 16 is a major source of congestion that affects all of West Auckland. We are working and planning and designing a rapid transit service to run alongside the North Western Motorway. That'll take a little while, but in the meantime, we're going to improve the frequency of buses and have an interchange at Te Atatū, at Lincoln, and at Westgate. That will shorten the commute and make the commute easier for people who rely on State Highway 16. I also secured $35 million through the Shovel Ready infrastructure program for the shared walking and cycling pathway between New Lynn and Te Atatū. It will be an amazing legacy walking and cycling project running alongside the Faux River foreshore, and will be fantastic both for cycle commuters, kids going to and from school, and weekend joggers and cyclists. As Minister for Economic Development, I've worked hard to bring international film production companies to New Zealand to film major productions like Amazon's Lord of the Rings, who are filming their TV series right here in West Auckland. That is putting in, and will over the next few years, several $1 billion of investment, and has already created hundreds of jobs and a lot of work for West Auckland firms. And I'm committed to continuing that. Jobs is my number one priority for West Auckland, and that's my mission for the next 3 years.
Awesome, thank you, Phil. Alfred, what have you done for the last 3 years?
Yeah, so
what will you do in the next 3 years?
So in the last 3 years, I've gone back to being local. When you're in opposition, you obviously not on the fiscal benches where you can actually be able to do some things. But what I have been doing is being able to work with local constituents in issues from everything from housing to immigration, local businesses. So for instance, just up here, just along Central Park Drive, businesses with local council, issues that they were struggling and challenged with. So we got some of the road markings that were changed that was causing some real concern and harm over there. Working with local schools, in fact one of the schools that you were at, Samuel, when you were a teacher as well. So looking at how they can look at making things safer for pedestrian crossing for schools, and for that school in particular as well. I'm part of the community patrol, so for me, I am definitely in community. So it's one thing that I've been a cabinet minister. I champion things like the causeway, the Waterview Tunnel, the interchange both here at Te Atatū and at Lincoln Road as well. So those things that I've already had experience with, but when I went go back into local. So it's one thing to say that you can be a cabinet minister and you've done things, but how are you able to get into the ground and actually work with communities and with people as well? Then actually started here from this church when 4 years ago Mrs. Tiana was tragically taken from us. She was murdered just down the road here. There was a candle vigil. People talked about more police and so forth. Actually, I got about being more about community. The Waitakere Support Network, the family violence, which was support in White Ribbon that I've been a part of as well, locally in Te Atatū as well, and also to the community patrols, which I'm an active member. I've been out with the local St. John ambulance, with the police, and then also too with the fire services. I've actually helped raise funds for a cancer society by running up to Sky Tower City with all the fire services gear on as well. So what I'm trying to say to you is that everything local that I can do is to champion the things that make a difference. I'm not just about doing things in Parliament, I'm also about doing things locally in the community as well.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Alfred. Brendon and Simon, I understand that not being in Parliament or government, your contribution to Te Atatū might look slightly different, but still very much important. So what have you done for Te Atatū in the last 3 years, and what do you plan to achieve in the next 3 years for Te Atatū? We will start with Brendon from top.
Yeah, it might look different to the contribution that the real politicians have had, but certainly not less significant. And I've been in Auckland, I moved here about 6 odd years ago. What I've seen happen here in Te Atatū, up close every time I've tried to buy a house here, is that house prices have basically doubled in that time. Now, that is probably the single biggest issue facing the area. When house prices go up, rents go up, you got roughly about 40% of people in the electorate who rent. Now, how are people surviving when that happens? Wages aren't going up. So what I've done is in the last 3 years, I've spent a couple of thousand hours using my skills to research what's actually causing this. What is the real fundamental issue here and how do you solve it? So I wrote a policy for TOP on housing and urban development that is comprehensive, links in with a whole suite of policies that actually target the root cause of our rising house prices, which is flowing on to a whole lot of other social problems in the region. That's what I've been doing.
Awesome. Great. Thanks for that, Brendon. And lastly, Simon, what have you done for Te Atatū the last 3 years, and what will you do for the next 3 years?
Well, I've lived in Te Atatū now for 2 years, and before that for a couple of years in Henderson. And one of the things that struck me about this part of Auckland is how connected we are between the foothills of the Waitakere Ranges and the sea. And look, that's what attracted me to live here in Te Atatū. So I recently got involved with the Orangahina Harbour View Restoration Society and Motomanawa Pollen Island Restoration Group to do some tree planting down on the foreshore. But in a previous role at Auckland Council, I was actually able to deliver a piece of infrastructure for Te Atatū, although I didn't have access to quite the same budget as Phil does. But you never know. The voters will decide who gets the budget after the election. But when I was working at Auckland Council as an engineer, I delivered a project at Taipari Strand, which is a local park and reserve. And for those of you who don't know, back in the day, the council tipped hundreds of thousands of tonnes of rubbish in Te Waiopirera River. And that is now a public park and reserve. So when I was at Auckland Council, I delivered a pump station upgrade at Taipari Strand to make sure that we captured some of those really nasty leachates and controlled them from leaking out into the environment. The other things that I delivered in that role were investigations and reports to identify what do we do with these sites in the future? How do we protect coastal landfills from erosion, but also from really serious events like tsunami and long-term events like climate change. So I hope in future I will be able to make a much greater contribution to Te Atatū.
Great. All right, for these next few questions, I'm just going to drop it to a minute just so that we can get out of here on a time. I know, Simon, I know.
Go for 30 seconds.
Or 30 seconds. Elevator pitch, that'd be great. This next question comes from Carmel. The social housing list has tripled in 3 years and is creeping towards 20,000 people. What do candidates propose to do that will increase housing stock, particularly in Te Atatū? We're going to we'll go with Alfred on this one. All right. So social housing has tripled in 3 years. It's been on that national started a sell-off program to replace. You never got to replace them, but you did sell them off and have temporarily put us in this short stock. What do you propose? How do we increase the housing stock, particularly in Te Atatū? 1 minute now.
So first of all, we didn't actually sell them off, we actually devolved them into community housing providers. So we set up the third sector. Third sector provide a better way of wrapping wraparound support and different alternatives, like shared equity schemes, which actually as a government we struggled to be able to do. So for us, that was the way that we would do it. And what we would do now, we would continue to invest in more community housing providers, provide them a capital base in which they can develop not only more housing, but also more housing products that allow for not only affordability, but also accessibility into the market as well. That for us is our approach. We think that has worked. And again, like I said, it wasn't the depleting of the stock, actually was putting the stock in the hands of the third sector who provide a better service, such as the services up here in Ranui, with Ranui Baptist, who now sort of service around some of the emergency housing that they have as well. It's providers like that, small providers, but bigger providers, like Salvation Army, Habitat for Humanity, and the Housing Foundation. That's the approach that we would take.
Okay, thank you. So more third-party, Vision West, Salvation Army, getting that sort of public-private partnership going on with social housing. Phil, you used to be the housing minister, the Minister of Housing, not so much anymore. What would you do for Te Atatū to increase stock?
So actually, under Alfred's former national government, they reduced the total number of state and community housing by 3,000 across New Zealand while they were in office. Since we've been in government, we've built 5,000 new state and community homes. We've committed the funding for another 8,000. We've overseen the biggest building program by any government since the 1970s. We've massively increased the spending supporting organisations like Vision West in West Auckland to house the homeless. Currently, in this electorate alone, in the Te Atatū electorate, there are 71 affordable Kiwi-built homes for sale in this electorate. And so we will continue to build more state and community housing. We will build affordable Kiwi-built homes, and we'll continue to back the efforts of organisations like Vision West to house the homeless.
Okay, so looking at that third party as well, which is great. Brendon, what's Top's? How is Top going to give us more housing particularly in Te Atatū?
Yeah, well, firstly, while we can provide more housing, the first thing we've got to do is actually plug the big tax loophole that is making the house prices go up and up and up. You know, we can't. It's a bit like trying to heat your house when the front door's wide open. So we've got to plug that first, then we can build our way out of it. If people can't put two and two together and realise that increasing rates of homelessness and it is related to the unaffordability that's getting out of control, then you're either an idiot or you're trying to pull the wool over people's eyes. In terms of actually providing more houses, yes, we would make sure that an overall urban development strategy allows for that. It allows for the intensification needed. We would also team up and make sure that Kāinga Ora can team up even better with non-government organisations, community groups, things like that, to provide the sort of housing we need, social housing, and a good mix of a good range of types of housing where we need it.
Great. And Simon, 1 minute.
Thanks, Samuel. Well, it's great to hear that both Alfred and Phil support involvement of the private sector in a partnership role, and ACT certainly supports that. One of the challenges with delivering more social housing by the private sector is that the Resource Management Act and council planning rules stand in the way of quick and efficient delivery. So ACT would propose to introduce an Urban Development Act. That would involve, unfortunately, repealing your Act, Phil, because your Act is only for the benefit of your own ministry, Kāinga Ora, where in fact if we want to develop houses by the private sector and actually add to the whole number of houses in the country, we're going to have to open up the Resource Management Act and actually get more houses built. And we're also going to need to give councils the opportunity to, through additional private sector funding, to deliver the infrastructure, the pipes in the ground, to actually facilitate that.
Okay. So it seemed like all of us sort of looking at that third party option, looking at the community housing, which is great. I always love it when we're all on the same page, much like we were with Waitakere Hospital. Which brings me to my next question, and the last question of the night. What is the best idea you've heard from another candidate tonight? All right, so just showing a bit of love for who's on the panel tonight. Who has had the best of, well, maybe not the best idea, other than your own idea, but the idea where you thought, actually, he has a point, I need more information about this. Let's start with you, Phil. Who do you think brought up a really good point tonight?
I've appreciated Brendon's understanding of urban development, of the need for reform of the planning system, of tax, of infrastructure, and this kind of whole of system approach to reforming the housing market so that we can allow our towns and cities to grow. It sounds very much like Labor's urban development policy. Okay,
but he'll claim that he's written it sooner. But that's okay. All right, Alfred, one idea from the panel tonight that you thought, actually, that's not a bad idea.
Yeah, so I think that both Simon and I would agree around the RMA, and we've openly talked about that, reviewing that and reforming that. I think it's well overdue for that. It's always been politically difficult because there have been different ideologies on either side. We tried to get that through. Unfortunately, we weren't able to, but I believe that the changes that we would propose would be similar, and I'm sure that Simon and ACT would agree with some of those changes. We do have similar views on that, and so that's the one thing that I think tonight that I've appreciated hearing from Simon.
Great. Okay, and for our two minor parties, let's start with you, Simon. One idea that you've heard from the panel tonight that go, actually, they're probably on the right path there, or something that you'd like to explore a little bit more with that party. 1 minute.
Well, I do like the idea of National's proposed tax cut, which unfortunately is only temporary. So I think if we get to the line in a few weeks' time, where National and ACT have the opportunity to form a government,
then it'll become a permanent tax cut and probably bigger.
Then I think the opportunity is there to actually give New Zealand workers an opportunity to keep more of what they earn.
That's right.
And so I think we can find some common ground there.
Great. Tax cuts for us. Yay. Brendon, an idea from the table tonight. We think, actually, yep, that's almost on the money there. 1 minute from you.
Well, given that we talked about the referendums, I would say, related to the cannabis, I like the fact that Phil straight away said we should treat this as a health issue, not a legal issue. That rings very true. So I would say that.
Okay, nice and quick. I like it. So, look, Phil likes Brendon. Brendon likes Phil. Alfred likes Simon. Are we seeing natural parties here? We know that ACT and National work together. Brendon, you said that you're willing to work with anyone at the last meeting. Simon, I think ACT's stance is pretty clear that you'll work with National.
So ACT's stance is that we will work with parties across the House that agree with ACT's principles.
So Labour's
freedom. Look, there may well be things we could work with Labor,
yeah,
but based on Labor's performance and their principles around a high tax economy and profligate spending and supporting the Provincial Growth Fund and all of those things, those are policies that ACT could not possibly support.
Cool.
So what we understand is that if you need to form a government, you need 61 seats. If ACT has an opportunity to support National, we will, but we'll be sitting on the crossbenches and we'll be voting bill by bill.
Yeah, cool. So, but if Labour turned around on October 18th and said, ACT, we need you, you'd be open to it.
Samuel, we'd be open to it, but I tell you what, the day that...
Just a simple one answer, yes or no, you'd be open to it.
The day that Labor agrees with our tax cuts then that's the day that you'll see unicorns and rainbows
Oh,
in the sky. All right?
Simon, don't call us, we'll call you.
all right. Which actually, obviously Nationals worked with a lot of parties, New Zealand First in the past. Obviously they work with ACT. ACT really, with all due respect to Simon, survives because of a electorate deal. Would you, and I know that you can't speak for your party, but you'd be open to working with Top and the Greens, barring the Greens?
Yeah, look,
stance?
we've all, and in 2017, there were conversations. There was an attempt to have a conversation with James Shaw. At that stage, he hadn't made the announcement around the Green College, so he was actually considered a very moderate, conservative sort of type person, even though liberal in certain types of his policies. But
you're really hurting him now. We're really damaging his prospects when you talk like that.
But the fact is that they made the decision not to work with National.
Yeah, sure.
But
sure.
We've had a long-formed alliance with ACT for quite some time, and so confidence in supply is what we've had. At the same time, too, they have the sovereignty of their own views and values, which I think is really important.
Is that like a owner and lapdog type relationship?
Hey. Come on.
So
put the guns away.
So just to be clear, David Seymour has been elected as the MP for Epsom twice, and he
because
has
of a cup of tea.
I absolutely refute that. He's knocked on 13,000 doors every year. And so the people of Epsom continue to give him their vote. And what you'll see in the coming election is he's going to win that seat with a huge majority. And we'd be happy to share our internal polling unlike some other parties.
Why do you think the leader of the National Party tells their voters to vote for Seymour every election?
All right, gentlemen.
Yeah, but it's not. Don't forget, Jeanette Fitzsimons and Helen Clark had an agreement down in Coromandel. So look, electoral concessions are something that have been there for a long time.
It does happen.
It's nothing new. It's not just with National.
Thank you. Your mate's denying it.
Thank you. All right. Phil, lastly, again, I know that you can't speak for your party. That's obviously, I suppose, caucuses or your boards.
No, look, it's very clear, Samuel. Labor would not work with the National Party in government. We would not work with ACT.
Even for the better good?
It's a matter of values, and our values lie on the centre-left. We've demonstrated that we formed a government made up of three parties that's provided stability, continuity, and has guided this country through the COVID-19 crisis better than almost any country in the world, and I think those results speak for themselves.
Okay, and so what about Top, who's sitting next to you?
If Top makes it into Parliament, I would imagine that we could work with them quite easily.
Open the door.
Yep.
Great. All right, gentlemen, so last but not least, as we wrap up, 1 minute to say why Te Atatū should give you our vote. Why am I going to tick your name on October 17th? 1 minute. Let's start with the incumbent, Phil, from Labour.
So I'm asking for your party vote this election to re-elect Jacinda Ardern, Labour-led government. I'm also asking for you to vote Phil Twyford for Te Atatū. No disrespect to Simon and Brendon, but history shows that the electorate race in this electorate comes down to a two-horse race, and this year will be no different. The major choice that voters face will be between myself and my National Party opponent, Alfred Ngaro. And if you re-elect me as the member for this electorate, you'll get a member of cabinet, in all likelihood, a member of cabinet in the next Labour-led government. That's what the polls are predicting. If you choose my opponent, you'll get someone who will be not only in opposition, but a low-ranked backbencher. Alfred was dropped to 30 on the National Party list. I don't know why, Alfred, but that's the verdict that your party has delivered. If you re-elect me, I will continue to deliver the things that West Auckland needs.
Thank you, Phil. We're going to go to Alfred. 1 minute on why Te Atatū should tick Alfred Ngaro on October 17th. 1 minute.
So I'm a true blue Westie. I was raised here, schooled here, played rugby here, got married here, got trained here as an electrician, did a theological degree. All four of my children were born at Waitakere Hospital. You can't get any more West than that. I understand the DNA, what it means to be a pioneer. Parents came from Pacific, we were migrants. Okay, I was born here, but at the same time, too, I understand what it means to work hard, to work smart. You know, out here in the West, you know, we either say go hard or go home, and that's who we are. I'm a person who's been a cabinet minister, but I'm also, too, I'm a community person. I know what it means to work hard and work smart. I'm not just the person who can go up and sort of make decisions, you know, at the highest level of governance. Actually, I get out there on the ground. What you see is what you get. And what I say is what I mean, and what I mean is what I say. So that's what people know about me and what I deliver and offer as well. And it's not about whether Phil wants to turn around and sort of make people doubt, because the truth is that in the time that I've been here, I've proven the fact is that I'm the person that they can trust.
And there's time. Great, thank you, Alfred. Simon, 1 minute on why Te Atatū will vote for you. I think what Phil raised is a valid point. We unfortunately, with all respect, we unfortunately do have a 2-horse race. Let's get the electorate voting and looking at minor parties, not just the big parties, but also the minor parties. 1 minute on why we should vote for Simon Court on October 17th.
Yeah, thank you, Samuel. You said it. The electorate should vote for Simon Court on October 17th. But what's more important is that you act your party vote.
Electorate vote?
Your party vote.
Electorate vote.
So in terms of your electorate vote, if you give me your electorate vote, you also need to act your party vote. So the reason that you need to act your party vote is so you send more MPs like me to Parliament. That is, I've had 25 years' experience as a civil and environmental engineer, solving some of New Zealand's worst environmental problems, cleaning up contaminated land, fixing some of our worst legacy landfills. I've also delivered major infrastructure projects, some worth hundreds of millions of dollars, so I have real-world experience in delivering infrastructure on the ground. And I tell you, no one's told me how you get that tram to the airport up Queen Street, Phil, without a winch. So I recommend you give your candidate vote to whoever you like, but you give your party vote to ACT.
It's not very good. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry to break your heart, Samuel.
Yeah, we want champions of Te Atatū. Don't get me wrong, Aotearoa is important, and I understand how important the party vote is. But as I mentioned right from the start and in my emails, we want a champion of Te Atatū. And I look at the legacy of Chris Carter that he left, and everyone that you talk to that grew up in Te Atatū knew Chris Carter because he was a real champion of Te Atatū. I don't care what party he was part of. He was a champion for Te Atatū. He knew the community. He got out there and done it. And we've got to bring the electorate seats back to that, I believe. 65 seats, electorate seats, nationwide. We've got to represent the people.
Samuel, I accept that, but what's likely to happen after the election is you're going to have 3 Te Atatū MPs. So that's a win-win-win for the people of Te Atatū. Party vote ACT.
Brendon, why should we vote for you on October 17th on the electorate vote, please?
Yeah.
1 minute.
Look, for the people of Te Atatū, the single biggest problem facing you is housing affordability here. House prices have gone up, have doubled here in the last 7 years. That is massive. That is what we've got to get under control. Now look, I bet my bottom dollar I probably know more about housing and urban development than anyone else here. I know how to fix the problem. Now, we know that Phil, where he's sitting on the party list at the moment, he is going to get in anyway. He's going to be in government. So look, you can vote for me, for a party and me that actually have the answers to this. So you'll get 2 MPs in there, and you can actually ensure that the change needed can actually happen, because it ain't going to happen otherwise. History over the last 30 years tells us that. Doesn't matter whether it's a national-led coalition or Labour-led coalition, the same problems keep getting worse and worse and worse. It ain't going to change until there's the right minor party in there.
That's ACT.
All right. So, doesn't matter if it's Labour or National, we seem to be getting the same problems, but that's going to be a whole nother meeting. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time tonight. It's been a troop. I know some of you have really had to fight to get here tonight, but it's been great reading the comments and just listening to you guys more. No matter on what I think about your views or anything, I wish you all the very best for your campaign. I wish you the most favourable outcome for October 17th, and I really hope that you'll stick to your word if you're in Parliament or even government. All right. Please be a champion for Te Atatū, and let's be the best electorate in Aotearoa. To the audience, thank you very much for joining us tonight, and I really hope tonight's been informative, and until next time, good night.
Thanks, Samuel.
Thank you.
Yeah.